Every night, around about this time, we bring you the Power Seat. This being a Friday, very special guest. Mmusi Junior Mangadi is a South African entrepreneur and insurance professional, best known as the co-founder of Accessible, an FSCA-authorized short-term insurance brokerage. Through Accessible, he helps individuals and businesses with personal, commercial, and specialist insurance needs, with a focus on aligning cover to actual risk, identifying savings, and removing unnecessary cover so clients can make informed decisions. With experience across claims administration, technical support, telecommunications, and account management, Muzi brings a practical understanding of customer service, risk, and business operations. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Political Science and International Relations from Northwest University and a National Certificate in Short-Term Insurance at NQF Level 5. At Accessible, his vision is to make insurance easier to understand, more affordable, and more responsive to the needs of South African consumers and businesses. So let me welcome my very special guest tonight. Muzi, how you doing?
I'm absolutely great, Mr. Mataz. Thank you so much for having me today.
You're a very busy man trying to sort out all the insurance problems South Africa is facing.
Yeah,
Well
look,
done.
every day is another mountain to climb, but
hmm
we have our carabiners ready, and we are up for the challenge always.
Well done. As a co-founder of Accessible, what gap did you find in South African insurance?
Look for us, my business partner and I, to be quite honest, it wasn't necessarily the issue of finding a gap in the market. We just realized that the sheer size of the market,
Yeah.
was just ripe and ready for the taking. I mean, you're looking at, just the SADC region alone was estimated according to the African Development Bank last year, that the economy was projected to grow by about 4.2%. And as somebody in the industry, the first thing that I don't want to be funny about it, but the first thing that rings in my mind when I hear that is that there's money to be made. So,
Yeah.
we really just wanted to understand, and we did quite a lot of market research into it, and we realized that the pie is big enough for everybody.
Mm. Yeah, I agree. I agree. Is it true
Mm.
though, Muzi, that a lot of people think the Southern African market is underinsured?
Look, I wouldn't say that necessarily. I mean, we have one of the best, finance industries in the world.
Mm.
The Twin Peaks model that has been applied by, compliance agencies like the FSCA, have really just made sure that people are pre-educated about the sort of, products that they could go into. You know, it's a very transparent, and, just getting an FSCA license is probably one of the hardest things to do. So, um, I wouldn't necessarily say that most people are underinsured. I think we have a very good and informed client base in South Africa that's,
hmm
again, ripe and ready for the taking.
Okay. Accessible focuses on transparent, affordable, and client-centric insurance. What does that look like in practice for your clients?
Well, Mr. Mataz, the insurance pool allows people to indemnify each other's misfortunes and mistakes. So our job is generally to give our clients the best cut from that. I've always likened having, a brokerage, um, similar to what you would a tour operator, if I rather, in a city that you're vacating in. Generally getting a tour operator who understands the area better would generally improve your experience of the place. And the same thing applies for. And what we really do is we bring that understanding through just to make sure that our clients are, number one, insured to the best of our ability, And number two, we really just focus on the client's context to make sure that we're able to give them, exactly what they need at any given time in the stages of their life.
Mm. Since you've now become an insurance guru, are there common areas where people are overinsured or paying for cover they do not need?
Well, look, there's a trend that's been around for multiple years, and one of the trends is that the easiest product to sell is what most employees from the different insurers are going to offer clients. And what you find is clients sitting with a stack of funeral covers that they don't necessarily need because a needs analysis was not conducted in the
Mm.
best way possible. So generally, what I've picked up is that a lot of people are stacking insurance policies that are related to funeral covers, and it really doesn't work that way because there's quite so much that they could get to actually meet their context in a more affordable way.
Mm. For small SME owners, what are the top three insurance mistakes you see, and how can they be avoided?
One of them is not being insured at all. I think a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people think that they can actually self-insure. They're under the assumption that if they stack up enough money, they'll be able to pay for any issues that transpire during the operations. And one of I'm one of those people who believe in Murphy's Law. Every time something goes wrong, there's more likely to go wrong.
True.
And generally, what they find is they find themselves in a position where they're overwhelmed, they're inundated with, the amount of issues from a single loss, and it really does affect their businesses negatively. Another thing is speedy ownership instead of rental agreements. Um, I tend to say, look, if spreading risk is the way to go. So if you can pass liability to somebody else, another company, if you are in the business of, similar to what Uber has done, if you look at Uber as a business model, um, they don't carry any of the physical, risk that comes with, or rather the liability that comes with owning a taxi or a vehicle to transport people. And what that does is that it minimizes their risk by, a huge percentage. And that's what I generally say. Look, if the model allows you to pass over risk or liability to a third party, that's honestly one of the best ways that you can go. And sometimes another thing rather is insuring directly means dealing with whoever you make contact with first, and it's not always the best fit. So just a quick recap, it's not being insured at all. Running too quickly to, own assets that you don't necessarily need in your business, and insuring directly. These are the three big mistakes that most of
Mm.
these SMEs do.
Okay, cool. Muzi, you work across personal, commercial, and specialist insurance. Which area do you find most misunderstood by some of your clients?
Definitely commercial. I think the sheer size of uh, the categories, and the different portions of cover. You're looking at, maybe for instance, uh, an SME owner who runs a fleet of trucks, and they're delivering something like a hazardous chemical. A lot of the times they don't really touch on the sort of cover that protects them. They'll get perhaps goods in transit cover and not, get debris removal. So
Mm.
when they put in their claim, they'll get paid out for the GIT and not the debris removal, and these costs add up.
Mm. Yeah. With your background in claims administration and technical support, how has that experience shaped how Accessible handles client services?
Look, it's what we do and at Accessible is that we focus specifically on speed. One of the challenges that we've seen in the market is that turnaround times tend to be a bit relaxed. And what I've picked up from my technical background was the fact that if you are able to provide a service at the quickest speeds, make sure that your clients are not struggling with getting feedback from your team, you'll generally have huge customer satisfaction. So that's one thing that I learned from my technical background. We treat everything like it has a service level agreement, and we approach with the aggression needed to bend turnaround times to the benefit of our clients. You know, we do this by means of building consistent relationships with the stakeholders in the industry, and generally we've had quite a bit of success in making sure that our clients remain satisfied to the best of our ability.
Mm. I believe that insurance and technology have found a meeting point, and you mentioned quite a lot of that in your journey. How is technology changing the way brokerages service clients, especially in South Africa?
Well, look, with the introduction of things like machine learning, you know, artificial intelligence, we've essentially found a way to, speed up the process. Like I mentioned, I think, the distance between a customer having a query and it being resolved needs to be shortened always. There's always room for improvement. So, you know, technology has really, really, really managed to, break the boundaries of stagnation as far as, meeting, um, turnaround times, it's introduced precision into operations and customers are all the happier for it.
Mm, mm. What role does information dissemination and education play in helping clients make informed risk decisions instead of just buying any odd policy?
Well, I touched it on it earlier to mention that we as the insurance, or rather as a member of the insurance industry, I found out that because we have a very informed client base, by the time somebody gets into the job market at the age of about 20 or 21, they've already had experience from their parents on how to deal with their covers. I think generally when young people get into the job market, and those who, far older people who are already in the job market tend to review their policy. You as a broker tend to find that they're really, really informed. So again, the education aspect of each client tends to make it all the bit easier to reach the bottom line when having a discussion with them about, the potential covers that they could take. It's always so much easier to deal with a client who knows exactly what they're looking for, because when you present it, they'll be able to identify it with speed.
So, Accessible is an FSCA authorized brokerage. Why is it that important for consumers to know when choosing an insurer or a broker?
Look, I touched on this earlier to say that, we have one of the best, finance industries in the world. And the only reason that this is the case is because it's heavily compliance driven. I mean, it's a mountain climb to try and get yourself an FSC license, because of just the sheer amount of work that goes into being, identified as a compliant agency. And look, it as hard as it to obtain, it's just as hard to retain. And
Mm-hmm.
because of that, most of our clients tend to know that if you have the market, if you have an FSCA license, you are number one, you're compliant. Number two, it means that you meet the certain, the specific industry standards that are going to provide you with the sort of client satisfaction that is required in the industry.
All right. So, how do you help clients identify saving opportunities without reducing the quality of service that they require?
Look, as a broker, I typically mention that we work for the client, not insurance companies. I think most people are a bit reluctant to deal with brokerages because they assume that this is going to be an additional cost to the sort of service that they're trying to procure from an insurer. But um, I reiterate this a lot of the times with my clients that look, we work for you as the client, and Because of this, we are able to negotiate. Um, we're able to negotiate fair rates with insurers. I mean, if if you're going to go to a big insurer that has a sales team of about 1,000 people, and on a daily they're picking up the phone, they're making these calls. Excuse me for that. They're picking up these calls. They're making these calls to try and sell. Each individual that is sitting at a table in a big insurer is trying to sell you as much as they can so that they can gain commission. But with a brokerage, there's a vast difference in our approach. We will come in, we will review your current policy, and then once we've reviewed it, we will negotiate. And because of this negotiation and because of the relationships that we've built with the insurers, we're generally able to get the best deal out of it for the client. And I mean, if you're sitting with a brokerage who's going to be providing an insurer with R1 million book per year, they're generally willing to listen when you say, "Hey guys, I have this client over here, and this is the rate that I'd like us to provide them with." So it really just it manifests itself through this negotiation process.
Okay. So, what trends are you seeing in short-term insurance right now in South Africa?
Ooh, there's quite a lot, but I think the big one for me um, is the difference between how people approach their long-term insurance and how they approach their short-term insurance. I've found that a lot of young people are far more interested in insuring their items as opposed to insuring their lives. And, looking at the sort of lifestyles that young people lead, in as much as they'd like to be flashy, seen at a club on a weekend, popping a bottle, I think it is very important for us to actually drive the point across to say that, look, these lifestyle habits that you're following need to be backed up by some form of continuity for the ones that you leave behind when you pass on, because unfortunately that is where everybody's going. And with the doom and gloom that comes with it, it's not necessarily a situation where you need to find yourself um, young ones remain behind. Um, you can always do best by actually ensuring that once you're gone as a breadwinner, for instance, that there is some form of continuity. So that for me is probably one of the biggest trends that I've picked up, that hyper focus on items instead of actually life insurance.
Yeah. Well, Muzi, we unfortunately are running out of time. But before you go, what is the biggest myth about insurance in South Africa?
I- I'm probably going to sound like an industry plant right now, but it's definitely the fact that insurers don't pay. It's been a running myth for years. I think most people don't really understand the idea behind the insurance agreement being a bona fide agreement, which is to say that the insurer itself says, "I'm going to be honest in this agreement," and you as the client are saying you're going to be honest with the agreement. I mean, you can imagine if you, Mr. Mataz, are a smoker or a drinker, for instance, and you don't mention this to your insurer. They insure you for a specific amount at a specific premium per month, only to find out at a later stage that, hey, Mr. Mataz has actually been a smoker for 20 years, a
Mm.
heavy drinker, and sometimes he likes jumping out of planes and paragliding, and things like that really affect the outcomes of people's claims. And as a person, or rather as an individual in the industry, I try and reiterate to clients to say that, look, it's a myth that insurers don't pay, because they do.
Yeah.
The problem comes in the fact that you did not interact with your policy schedule enough to know what exclusions they had, and you were dishonest at the beginning of the agreement. And that's, for me, that's generally it. I try and keep insurance as simple, I word it as simply as I can. And, dispelling these myths daily is something that me and my team are really, really focused on doing.
Yeah. All right. As the saying goes, honesty is the best policy. Muzi, thank you for your time. Wish you the best.
I really appreciate you having me, sir. Thank you.
Fantastic. Keep it right here on Channel Africa.